express my deep sorrow at the explosion involving the U.S. naval vessel Cole in Yemen. My prayers are with the families of those killed and injured and with all the brave men and women in uniform who serve our country every day around the world. Rest assured that the United States will seek with all our resources to determine the facts surrounding this tragedy. We will continue taking every step we can to protect our troops, our diplomats, but we will not retreat from our responsibilities. If it turns out, as it appears, to have been a terrorist act, we will hold those who committed it accountable and take appropriate steps.
On October 12, 2000, 20 years ago, a terrorist incident labeled the USS Cole bombing, which took place off the port of Aden, Yemen, was considered at that time the largest terrorist attack on the U.S. military in its history. With this video, I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown regarding this important incident, which led to an investigation which was impeded by politics. USS Cole was a naval ship under the command of Captain Kirk Lippold. It was docked on a fuel port off the port of Aden, Yemen, when on approximately 11:20 a.m., a small fiberglass boat carrying C4 explosives approached the port side and exploded by two martyrdom operatives. The explosion caused a 40 to 60 foot wide gash on the ship's port side, which caused 17 fatalities and injuring 37, and this included the two operatives. An immediate investigation followed, which was led by the New York City FBI Counter-terrorism unit, led by John O'Neill, the I-49 team, along with the Naval Criminal Investigation Services, or NCIS. However, Yemen was considered a hostile environment, especially to Western entities. At first, Yemen authorities considered the explosion to have been an accident set off by a detonation on board the ship. When O'Neill and his team landed in Yemen, they were met at the airport by hostile Yemen special forces, while speakers at the Yemen parliament, were calling for a jihad against the United States. However, the resentment settled after a few days, but the agents were uneasy about the situation, which remained untenable. Meanwhile, U.S. Yemen ambassador Barbara Bodine became rather defensive with the arrival of O'Neill, who had a reputation as a no-nonsense agent and had an aggressive appeal regarding his intense work ethic on Islamic terrorism. Bodine, however, was trying to mend relations with Yemen, which was a country which had a large influence from Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the FBI, the Al-Qaeda communications hub, which was located 272 miles north in the city of Sana'a, this house was actually owned by Ahmed al-Hada, who I've spoken in previous videos, a longtime associate of Osama bin Laden from his days in the Soviet-Afghan conflict. It was commonly known as the Yemen Hub, and this was the hub that was the main base of communications for Al-Qaeda, and it was being monitored at this time by the NSA and the CIA, unbeknownst to the FBI. They had no idea. Bodine would find O'Neill's investigation and his resounding aggressive nature investigating the issue to become too self-centric on O'Neill. And she rather was put off by his demeanor. And she would end up calling FBI Director Louis Freeh to force the issue of recalling O'Neill and his unit back to New York City. Bodine's pressure was backed by the State Department, and after some haggling, the FBI were recalled back to the United States, ending their investigation. Meanwhile, Yemen authorities had arrested suspects Fahad al-Kuso and Jamal al-Badawi. O'Neill and his closest agent, Ali Soufan, were not allowed to interview either of these men while they were in Yemen. And according to intelligence reports, there was no inconclusive evidence of who was behind the attacks due to Yemen officials stubbornly withholding evidence to U.S. authorities. And it was only suspected that bin Laden and al-Qaeda were behind the attack. Meanwhile, in January of 2001, the U.S. Navy concluded in its Judge Advocate General Emanuel report that Leopold acted responsibly under the hostile elements, and that the U.S. Navy was woefully unprepared regarding a surprise attack in hostile land. And this would change the situation for the U.S. Navy regarding how they would deal with terrorism elements in a foreign land regarding their preparations. Yemen authorities would release many suspects regarding who was involved in the attack shortly after the FBI left. And in 2003, al-Badawi, who was one of the Cole defendants, had escaped from Yemeni custody during a prison transfer. Meanwhile, CIA Director George Tenet testified during the 9/11 Commission regarding the incident, in which the report concluded on pages 201 and 202 in their final commission report, quote, on January 25th, Tenet briefed the president on the Cole investigation. The written briefing repeated for top officials of the new administration what the CIA had told the Clinton White House in November. This included the preliminary judgment that al-Qaeda was responsible, with the caveat that no evidence had been found that bin Laden himself ordered the attack. In March 2001, the CIA's briefing slides for Rice was still describing the CIA's preliminary judgment that a strong circumstantial case could be made against al-Qaeda, but noting that the CIA continued to lack conclusive information on external command and control of the attack, end quote. Meanwhile, intelligence about the incident came in slowly. Bin Laden was now suspected of being involved in the attack, but in what manner? It wasn't until much later, with the capture of key al-Qaeda operatives like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Wali bin Attash, who was called Khalad, that this incident regarding the Cole was spoken about during the 2000 al-Qaeda summit meeting in Malaysia. That the initial attack was supposed to be on the USS Sullivan while in the port of Aden on January 3rd of 2000, which was supposed to be part of the 2000 Millennium Plot. But the boat that was supposed to be carrying all these explosives sank before it hitting its target because it was carrying too much. Shortly after this, the mention of an attack on U.S. ships was present during the meeting. At this time, also, Yemeni Prime Minister Abdul Karim al-Irani reported that Khalid al-Mihdhar, who was suspected of being involved with the hijacking of American Airlines Flight 77, had been one of the key planners of the attack on the Cole and had been in the country at the time of the attacks. In 2002, al-Qaeda operative named Abd al-Rahman al-Nashri was captured and interrogated by U.S. officials. And he was also suspected of being behind the attack on the USS Cole. And he was immediately sent to CIA black sites in Thailand and Poland for an undisclosed amount of time, and he was tortured mercilessly. Afterwards, CIA officials disagreed on al-Nashri's role in planning the Cole bombing, including one official who said of al-Nashri that he was, quote, he was an idiot, he couldn't read or comprehend a comic book, end quote. But in 2007, al-Nashri complained to military tribunal courts that he was tortured to confess his involvement behind the attacks. This was a repetitive complaint. This was also stated by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah, in which they too were tortured. Al-Nashri was tortured under the direct supervision of then CIA Director Gina Haspel, who was also the first captive. He was also the first captive in Guantanamo Bay to face the death penalty. On January 5th of 2009, al-Nashri's charges were withdrawn without prejudice, but they were reinstated in 2011. Al-Nashri actually is still in Guantanamo Bay at the present moment. As for the other suspects regarding the USS Cole, Fahad Mohammed al-Qusa was killed by a CIA drone strike in Yemen on May 6th of 2012, and Jamal al-Badawi was killed by an American drone strike on January 1st, 2019, which leads to the question of why was the investigation impeded by Yemen authorities and U.S. authorities? According to National Security Council Coordinator for Counter-terrorism, Richard Clark, it was basically about politics. And in an interview with Frontline on March 20th, 2012, quote, I think there were two things going on in Yemen. The first thing was that the government of Yemen didn't want us to know all the details, in part because that would reveal that some low-level people in the Yemen government may have been part of the conspiracy, in part because it would have shown that the Yemen government didn't really have control over a large section of Yemen, in part because it would have shown that Yemen was filled with terrorists from a whole variety of different organizations. So Yemen didn't want to cooperate fully, didn't want us to see everything that was there. The other thing that was going on, that you had a U.S. ambassador, Bodine, who wanted to be fully in control of everything that every American official did in that country, and resented the fact that suddenly there were hundreds of FBI personnel in the country and only a handful of State Department personnel. She wanted good relations with Yemen as the number one priority. John O'Neill wanted to stop terrorism as the number one priority. And the two conflicted. Almost all of us who were following the details in Washington, whether we were in the Justice Department, the FBI, the White House, State Department, the Defense Department, almost all of us thought John O'Neill was doing the right thing. But the State Department has to support its ambassador. State Department doesn't have a lot of assets, doesn't have a lot of airplanes or a lot of guns. It's basically got its ambassadors. It got a letter to every ambassador from the President of the United States saying, quote, you, ambassador, are my personal representative in the country. You're in charge of everything the United States does. So when the ambassador makes the decision, the State Department feels for institutional reasons that they have to back her up. So I think even though the people we were working with in the State Department who are following the case thought the ambassador was wrong, nonetheless, they decided to back her up. End quote. So basically, this was the investigation of the USS Cole in a nutshell. Incomplete and without any justice behind it.